19. Someone was calling his name. He knew the voice, could not answer it. Dyson! He tried to wave a hand, give some sort of call, but failed. His mind sluggishly attempted to recall what had happened. Slowly, old Dyson recalled Lila and the revelation of her nature. That horrifying memory proved enough to enable him to let out a primitive shout, a garbled sound that proved sufficient for the searcher's own calls became more pronounced. Old Dyson! I know you're here somewhere. Where? It was Achilles' voice. Old Dyson finally realized. Good. Faithful Achilles. He tried to say the hunter's name, but it only came out as a rasping sound. Here he is, said what sounded like Saranthina. As grateful as he was to know that she also searched for him, old Dyson suddenly grew concerned. Lila would take special pleasure in tormenting Cyrus's daughter. Soft hands took hold of his face. Old Dyson instinctively jerked away, thinking that Lila had returned. However, that fear was quickly squashed as Saranthina said, Praise be! You're alive! Achilles! Madeline! Here he is! The sounds of figures thrashing through the brush alerted him to the others' nearby presence. He heard an oath which had to have come from the archer. Is he wounded? Asked Madeline, sounding more curious than concerned. He has bruises, Saranthina returned, but I see no cuts, no slashes. I don't feel any broken bones. Another figure leaned over the fallen farmer. He looks as pale as death, Achilles rumbled. Or worse. More and more details came back to him. He remembered fearing for his friends and his brother. He also recalled starting to walk back, but then, as if Lila had taken even his will to live from him, old Dyson had, with that warning, just blacked out. Had the others not come and searched for him, he wondered whether he would have ever awakened again. He supposed he eventually would have. After all, Lila had not seemed to want him dead, merely broken. How? He swallowed hard, then tried again. How did you know? It was as if he had asked them to join together to commit some terrible crime. All three grew oddly perturbed. Their silence added to his unease. Madeline finally spoke. We knew that your life was in danger. Old Dyson remembered his brother running through the house earlier, shouting his name. You did? We all did. The hunter and Saranthina nodded. I thought it was a nightmare, she added, but it was so terrible, I had to go check. That was when I noticed Achilles also up. And barely had she and I met when Madeline came insisting that he needed to see you a second time. The younger son of the Meads frowned. The notion would not go away, old Dyson. I knew that you might be angry with me, but I was determined to try to warn you again, only to have all three of us discover you and Lila gone. Lila! Gasped the Raven-Tress woman. We've forgotten about her. Old Dyson, isn't she with you? She was. His answer came out as a croak, not because of his condition, but rather the repulsive memories. And yet, a part of him still yearned for her. His companions anxiously looked around. He quickly shook his head. No, don't look for her. Old Dyson forced himself to a sitting position. With our luck, you might find her. He sensed their confusion. With help from both Saranthina and Achilles, old Dyson next stood. As he did, his gaze met that of his sibling. Curiously, the nightmarish vision of his brother struck old Dyson once more. He stared with such intensity that Mandolin finally looked away, as if guilty of something. Old Dyson, murmured Achilles. What do you mean? Why wouldn't we want to find Lila? Why wouldn't you want to find her? Had they not already been confronted with the reality of demons and spells, he could have never had told them. As it was, old Dyson's shame was so great that it took him a long pause before he could finally begin. And by the time he was through, they looked as horrified as he felt. You must have imagined it, the hunter insisted. It can't be true. A demon? Saranthina blurted, with a shake of her head. A demon? Only Mandolin, after his initial shock, nodded in understanding. It explains so much, he finally uttered. If one looks back at all that has passed. Old Dyson was not so certain that he shared his brother's opinion. He only knew that he certainly had been blind, deaf, and dumb. He had let Lila command him around as if he were a dog. People had died because of her madness, because of her intent to create a world of magical beings. It was to their credit that they took his story to heart. Old Dyson had left nothing out. Not even the part where Lila had claimed the world was called Sanctuary and had been created by rogue demons and angels. It was important to him that someone else understood that the demoness had some mad plan that had stirred up the temple and the cathedral, both of which somehow had ties to her. That brought him back to her final declaration. She had left him on his own to teach him the penalty for defying her. That meant that they were all in immediate danger. We have to leave Partha, he blurted. We have to flee for our lives. The jungles in the lowlands are our best bet. Hold, old Dyson, Chilios demanded. What do you mean? We can't flee. To flee means to become the hunted. And there's no defense in that. Chilios, all that I thought I could do turns out to be a lie. It was all her. Everything. The archer shook his head. I don't know if I believe that. It doesn't ring true. And it isn't, insisted Saranthina. Well, Dyson, I've watched you. I thought what you did. That could not have all been Lila. What I sensed when you touched me was a part of you. I know that as well as I know myself. Her face reddened as she said the last. While he appreciated all that she said, old Dyson refused to accept that his efforts had been anything but false spectacles directed in secret by Lila. You didn't see how easily she manipulated me. How easily she showed me that she could make me do whatever she wanted. Dyson? No, Sari. Had she wanted to, Lila could have just as easily have slain me herself, then and there. You saw how I was when you arrived, and it takes all I can muster just to keep standing. Julius grunted. There he has a point. Let's get him to one of the horses. As his friends assisted him, old Dyson noted how he was practically a baby. So weak had his struggle with the temptress left him. Yes, Lila had not been jesting when she had said that he was nothing without her. It would merely take the others a little longer to understand that. Unfortunately, they barely had any time left as it was. Sooner or later, someone would come for old Dyson. Your points would have much more merit, Mandolin commented as he held the reins of the animal while Achilles hefted old Dyson into the saddle. If they could, but explain how it is that Serentina and Chilios knew that you were in danger. The trader's daughter quickly seized hold of that point. Yes, that certainly doesn't sound like a ploy to work in her foul favor. You've got to see the truth, he growled, tearing the reins from his brother's fingers. It was all a trick. This was some game between demons and others in which I played the biggest fool of all. Bitterness overtaking him, he kicked the horse into motion and took off in the direction he had originally been heading. Achilles gave a shout, but old Dyson paid him no heed. He had intended to flee rather than risk his friends and loved ones any longer, and that was more important than ever. But behind him, he quickly heard the sound of hoofbeats. Swearing, old Dyson urged his horse to a full gallop. The path was treacherous, and made more so because it was beginning to slope downward. But he did not care. Had the animal tripped and tossed him to his death, it would likely have been the best of ends. Not only would he no longer have to fear being twisted inside and out by manipulators, but Mandolin and the others would surely be safe. They had never been suspected of being threats or potential weapons by the temple or the cathedral. They would have nothing to fear. Damn you, old Dyson! Achilles shouted. Hold up! The nearness of the hunter's voice startled him. He glanced back to see Achilles barely a length behind. Much farther in the rear were the murky forms of Mandolin and Serentina, who had to share one mount. Return to Partha! Old Dyson shouted back to the archer. Take them with you! I want no more deaths save maybe my own. Talk sense, old Dyson. You know that none of us will leave you now. Not after knowing what Lila was and what she did. The other two were no longer in sight. Looking ahead again, old Dyson saw a fork coming up. The path to the left almost immediately narrowed dangerously. Achilles would not be able to come on alongside him. Veering, old Dyson entered. His horse nearly stumbled as the terrain grew more wild and uneven. Very few had obviously taken this route in years, but he did not care. All he wanted was for it to slow or to stop those behind him. Achilles' voice rose as the hunters swore at something. Old Dyson did not look back, concentrating on his own course. The clatter of hoofs behind him lessened. His friend was clearly falling behind. Then, out of the night, a series of low, thick branches cut across the trail. Old Dyson barely had time to avoid striking the first one dead on. As it was, his right arm received a terrible blow that reverberated through his entire body. It was only by sheer will that the collision did not stun him enough to make him unprepared for the next and thicker branch. A third and fourth one came in rapid succession. Old Dyson ducked left, then right, then right again. The last of the branches scraped the top of his head. He felt a trickle of moisture, undoubtedly blood. But despite his injuries, old Dyson's hopes rose. Achilles would see the branches and be forced to slow. It was a chance for the son of Demetrius to either gain on his pursuer or lose him altogether, for there were places coming into the dim moonlight that promised old Dyson such cover that even the skilled hunter would be unable to track him. Then a crashing sound nearly caused him to steer his horse directly into a tree. Without thinking, old Dyson slowed the animal. The noise had come from back up the path, about where the treacherous branches would be. Branches. And if he had not slowed Achilles, old Dyson reined the horses to a halt and listened. Silence. No. The snorting of a horse. Not a horse in motion, though. He started to urge his mount forward, then hesitated again. Still, no sound other than the animal. With an oath, old Dyson turned back. He had wanted to lose Achilles, nothing more. If something worse had happened, the dark path proved just as haphazard to climb as it had to descend. Bits of earth and rock broke away under the hoofs. At one juncture, the horse's shifting nearly caused old Dyson to slip. Ahead of him, a massive form loomed. Achilles' horse, but without the hunter. Where? A groan arose from somewhere to the left, where the path dropped precautiously. Old Dyson's fears increased. He pulled up and, barely waiting for his mount to halt, leapt to the ground. Every muscle burned. In his anger, he had paid little mind to his own state, and now his body was angrily reminding him that he could barely walk. Yet, despite that, old Dyson continued. He took both of his mount's reins and took those of the other horse and tied them to one of the very branches in question. Old Dyson then stumbled in the direction of the moan. The irony of the situation did not escape him. Achilles had freely come to help old Dyson, and this was how his friend had been repaid. Guilt vied with shame now. He remembered even hoping that one of the branches would cause Achilles troubles, although not to this extent. Nevertheless, old Dyson had been aware of the danger, and yet he had not cared about anything but his own choices. The descent was a slippery one, for the ground gave way with every step. There was still not a sound of the third horse, and old Dyson wondered just how far behind his brother and Serentina were. He could not simply trust that if he dragged Achilles up to the path, that they would come across him. Old Dyson had ceased believing in miracles, great or small. Below him, he saw only darkness. It had been his hope that the hunter's blonde hair would stand out, but that was not the case. Old Dyson grew more concerned. Was he even in the same area where his friend had ended up? Then, some urge sent him toward the left, a place he would not have considered a possible location. Yet when old Dyson thought of turning back, he found himself unable to do so. Frowning, the farmer delved deeper. A moment later, old Dyson spotted a rounded form. He dove toward it, reaching out and cautiously turning it over. As he did, a cough escaped the shape. Oh, old Tyson. Strange. I thought I was rescuing you. I'm so sorry, Achilleos. I never meant for this to happen. Can you stand? He heard the hunter grunt in pain. Left leg stiffed, but I think it's just very sore. Give me a hand. As old Dyson did, his own body reminded him again of what it had suffered. The two men groaned simultaneously. With a weak laugh, Achilleus remarked it. We are a stalwart pair, eh? That brought a chuckle from old Dyson. I remember worse scrapes than this when we were children. We didn't groan at all then. Children are more resilient than old men. They slowly winded their way back up. More than once, one or both of them slipped. As they finally neared the top, old Dyson heard the slow clatter of hoofs. Mandolin and Serenthina had finally caught up. I promised we'd find them, his brother said with unnatural calm. You see? But the woman did not waste time answering him. Instead, sliding down from the animal and racing not toward old Dyson, but rather at Achilleos. Are you all right? She demanded, putting her arms around him. I'm fine. I am. Serenthina did not seem convinced, but she finally turned to old Dyson. What happened? He opened his mouth to explain, but Achilleos cut him off. I was careless, Serenthina. That was all. Fortunately, my good friend realized something had happened and came back for me. She ran her hands over the hunter's arms, chest, and face, not relaxing in the least until she was certain that his injuries were shallow. Praise be. If something had happened... Dyson saw that Achilleos had spoken truth when he had said that Cyrus's daughter had finally turned to him. It was one of the few things to make him happy this night. The two were such a good match. He felt his legs starting to give. Keeping his tone level, old Dyson said, Let's get the horses. It took effort for both men to move, which caused renewed concern for Achilleos from Serenthina. Your leg! She gasped. Is it broken? No, just bruised like my pride. I should know to watch out for low branches. Give me your arm, Serenthina insisted. She all but seized the hunter from old Dyson and guided him toward his horse. Despite all that he had been through, the scene momentarily made old Dyson smile. Other hands suddenly came to his own aid. Let me help you, Mandolin said, appearing next to him as if by magic. Put your arm over my shoulder. His brother's presence both comforted and shamed him further. Old Dyson muttered, Thank you, Mandolin. We are all we have left. His words struck the older son of Demetrius to the core. He had concerned himself so much with Lila, but he had not truly considered Mandolin in as much depth as he should have. But with that renewed concern came again thoughts of what would happen to Mandolin and the others if they remained with him. The Tauran jungle, Mandolin remarked quietly without warning. The deepest of them all southwest of Kejin. What about the Tauran jungle? Blinking, his brother glanced at them. Tauran? What do you mean? You mentioned the jungle. Specified the Tauran one? Southwest of the great city? Did I? Mandolin pursed his lips, but did not otherwise seem startled at his lapse of memory. It does strike me as a place to go if we are not returning to Partha. He nodded toward his mount. I have some provisions and water, enough for us to get started at least. Admittedly, that and having 2 riders slowed us down during the chase. Old Dyson could not hide his confusion. You gathered supplies? When? They were already prepared. I assume that it was an extra mount you had to abandon at the last moment. A glance at the horse ascertained for old Dyson that it was not the dark beast ridden by Lila. Yet, what explanation was there for a fully laden animal found waiting just when his brother needed one? Not certain whether this was a gift or bait of a sort, old Dyson thought again of the jungles. There was merit in the suggestion, despite its questionable origin. Somehow coming from Mandolin, he doubted that it had been planted by the demoness. The Tauran jungle, he muttered a second time, now with more conviction. You want to go there? It was not a question. With a grim nod, old Dyson replied, I don't think I have any choice. We do not have any choice. Old Dyson tightened his grip on his brother's shoulder, grateful for Mendelin's determination. We. Do not mistake me, old Dyson. I'm referring to Achilles and Saranthina, too. What about us? Called the hunter from the saddle. Even as he asked, he pulled the trader's daughter up to him. No one questioned the change in riding partners. We plan to ride to the Tauran jungle, Mandolin answered bluntly, before old Dyson could properly face the suggestion himself. Tauran? Achilles cocked his head to the side. The densest, most unknown, I've heard. Few folks there. Torah is the only city, the people said, to oil their skins black and file their teeth like daggers. He let out a laugh. Sounds like a delightful place to visit. Well, Dyson thought of the journey ahead. They would first have to travel through other unexplored and possibly treacherous regions before reaching their destination. In truth, there was really only one immense jungle, but being territorial, men always divided up places and gave them different names. The Tauran jungle just happened to be a particular piece of the much vaster one. In fact, assuming they made it that far, it was very likely that they would not realize it for days after. You cannot imagine Saranthina in such a place. Sari, if you say one word about me staying behind, old Dyson, old Dione, I'll teach you to regret it. There's no question as to whether I'm going. Achilles grinned. And you know that I won't argue with her either. Well aware of that, old Dyson nodded. However, he needed them to understand the urgency of the situation. If you come with me, there's no returning to Partha. I won't go back. There's too much of a chance that it'll be near impossible to leave again without arousing the entire town. This brought an immediate acknowledgement from Mandolin. Seeing that, Achilles and Saranthina quickly acquiesced. I have some supplies and water, old Dyson's brother informed them. I'll provide fresh meat along the way, the hunter returned without a trace of conceit. All there knew that Achilles would be able to keep his promise with ease. There really was only one thing left to say, and old Dyson had to say it now. Thank you. I'd rather you all stayed back, but thank you. As Mendel and Mandy said, they will discover as come to dawn. We should be as far away as possible by then. No one could argue with that logic. When the Parthians realized what had happened, some of them would surely go out hunting for old Dyson. At least at first. He hated abandoning them, but it was for their own good. They would soon find out that their gifts were tricked nothing. They would feel tricked, and anger would replace adoration. As he led the party off, old Dyson thought of how violent that anger might become. He had left the others in Partha. They might have become the focus of the townsfolk ire. Certainly, they would have been run out of it. In a sense, Mendelin, Achilles, and Serathina were better off with old Dyson. At least for the moment. Lucien stared into the bowl of blood, his gaze intense. He had seen everything occurring since first casting the spell in coordination with the other two demons. He had found her, Lilith, in the arms of the mortal, and he had planned well his sister's unveiling before the fool. What a delicious piece of work that had been. All her arrogance had been channeled into futile posturing and anger. She had turned on her own puppet, finally abandoning him. And there, Lilith had made the greatest of mistakes. The vision in the bowl finally began to fade, the result of the last of the life essence fading from the blood. Lucien could have redone the spell, but that would have required new bartering with Ostraga and Gulag, who would demand much more than the simple offering he had given them the first time. That was the trouble with both demons and humans. They always wanted more. No, Lucien would handle this purely on his own, for the reward would be too precious to share with anyone else. It would not be difficult to keep his two counterparts ignorant, for there was much that he had done since assuming his role as Primus, of which they were unaware, of which even his father was unaware. Thank you for laying the groundwork, sister dear, Lucien rasped. He was also grateful to the late Malik and Deimos, servants who had fulfilled their duties, whether they knew it or not. It had been a shame to lose both of them, but Lucien already had a notion as to a competent replacement for the high priest, and there were always more vicious Morlu. What was important was that by touching Malik's demon limb, which, knowing the cleric's greed and his sister's sense of irony, had been a foregone conclusion, Lilith had not only revealed herself, but had inadvertently removed, for a brief moment, any magical shields she had created. It had been at that moment that a patient Lucian had cast the spell, preparing the downfall of her plans. He had arranged so that when certain elements went into play, Oldias and Oldion would see her for what she actually was. It had all gone so perfectly. She'd even played into it further, in her fury twisting the facts so that her puppet would not realize what was truth and what was lies, and leaving Oldiason ready to be manipulated by him. Lucian's grin widened, then faded as the sensation that he was being watched overcame him. He immediately searched, not with his eyes, but rather his mind, pretending to stare at the fading scene in the bowl while, in actuality, scouring the chamber of the other presence. Yet, despite his best efforts, he found no one but himself. Still wary, the son of Mephisto quickly searched the temple for the other two demons. He found Gulag down below, the destructive beast tearing apart Morlu for the simple pleasure of it. Other Morlu attacked the demon with gusto, inflicting wounds that immediately resealed. This lack of success did not in the least dull their hunger. They simply attacked anew as Gulag ripped another of them apart. The demon of destruction knew that so long as he did not eat any of the broken bits, he could cause as much mayhem as he desired. The Morlu would simply be resurrected with the end of the cycle, their slaughter only making them even more vicious warriors when next they fought. Satisfied that it was not Gulag, Lucian sought then for Ostraga. The spider was a more cunning creature, being of Diablo's calling. If either of the two thought to spy upon him for their own goals, it would be that one. But Ostraga remained in one of the shadowed corners he preferred, dining at this moment on what little remained of Brother Ikran. Around the shrouded, multi-limbed form, smaller arachnids scurried. They were of the essence of the demon, extensions of him that did his bidding while he waited. Could it have been one of them? Lucian considered, but knew that even the children, as Ostraga called the creatures, bore his taint. Lucian would have recognized him in them. Still motionless, he surveyed the hidden chamber once more, but again found nothing. Demons, being what they were prone to unnatural distress, and Lucian knew that even he was not immune from that. He finally pushed the incident from his mind. All that mattered was Lilith's puppet. She had set him on the path. Lucian would now complete his education. Or, if the human proved to be nothing of value after all, destroy him. In a place that was and was not real, a figure shrouded in black materialized. Around him there was nothing but absolute darkness, yet he showed no discomfort in being there. In fact, this was home for him, as much as anywhere had been in 1,000 lifetimes. He waited in silence, aware that the one with whom he needed to speak would come when it was right to do so. The shredded figure understood that it might mean waiting for what seemed days, weeks, or even years, but that did not matter. In the other place, that which was called Sanctuary, no time would pass at all. He would return at the very moment that he had left, which still might be too late. There was no sound, no wind. He felt solid ground beneath his booted feet, but knew that to be illusion. In this place, everything that existed was but the dreams of his teacher. Then, from above, there came illumination, a warm light that stirred his tired bones. He gazed up, his eyes immediately adjusting to the difference. Above him, what appeared to be an array of distant stars formed. At first, they clustered together, but quickly began to spread far apart. As they did, they formed a vague shape, like a constellation. The stars create a half-seen gargantuan image that, to his trained eye, resembled a beast as mythic as himself.
It is her brother that moves.
The shrouded figure murmured.
He does not. That can only mean one thing.
And, in a voice that would have made even angels pause, the other replied,
Yes, there will be death